Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mandates with Guitar Greats. It has been a long time since I've done one of these, and what better time to do one than when everybody is stuck in the house on quarantine? At least over here in the UK, we certainly are stuck in quarantine still. And yeah, I've been working on a book project just recently, got a copy of the book to check out, and absolutely love the way that it has turned out. And it's really kind of relit that fire and passion for practicing jazz, but doing it in a much more musical way than a lot of music schools would encourage you to practice these things. Got me thinking about the artist in question, somebody that's always been a huge influence on me, one of my biggest influences growing up, learning from his columns in Guitar Techniques magazines, getting his books, listening to his recordings. So I would like to say a huge welcome and thank you for your time, of course, to Mr. Martin Taylor. Martin, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Levi. Sorry to get you up so early in the day, but we have a different kind of time clock.
Such is life.
You're looking well, though.
Thank you. I mean, I'll certainly say my studio is looking well. Me, not so much, but yeah. So, how's quarantine been treating you?
It's been very well. Do you know what the thing about it is? I realised quite early on that my day hasn't changed at all, really, because I come into my studio and I just work away on various things. My online guitar school, my Patreon site. I'm always involved in various projects that I can record and film here. I've been recording some library music for a company. And yeah, so it hasn't changed. And I take my dog for a walk twice a day. I come back, have dinner, and it's not any different. The only thing that's changed is I'm not going to airports anymore.
So you'd say it's a positive?
It is a positive, yeah, because it's something that I was getting very tired of anyway. I mean, I will get back to it at some point.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm enjoying it, and it's like I was talking to a couple of my guitar collaborators yesterday, Ulf Vicanius and Martin Simpson, and we were all saying the same thing, that this is a kind of a reset, not just for us musicians, but you know, for the whole world, really. You know, because things aren't going to be the same after this. It's going to be quite different. But I'm very excited about it, to be honest. Everyone says, "Will it go back to the old days?" Well, I hope not. You know, I don't want to go back to the old days. Let's just keep moving on. I think one of the things that everybody has really got to realize now is that there's so much that we can do virtually, like we're doing this now. I think the last time we did an interview, you had to
fly to
cross London on the underground and meet me at a Bill Wyman gig, I think it was, I was doing. And you know, we had to find somewhere to sit down and do that. Now we are in the comfort of our own studios, albeit we don't live very far from each other.
That is true.
Yeah, you're very near. Yeah, so it's very good. And also another thing is because if you spend so much time on the road, some musicians are different. But for me, anyway, when I'm on the road, it's not a creative time. Everything is just involved in getting to the next place and doing the gig. The gig is the number one, the most important thing is why you're there. So everything is just geared to doing that performance. And of course, creativity happens on the gig, but actually creating something new and actually sitting down and thinking, okay, what am I going to take things now? You don't really have the chance to do that. And as I was saying to Ulf and Martin yesterday, this is a great time. We're just thinking about what we're going to do, you know, and as things will be different after this. And what I was very pleased about talking to them is that they were very, like me, they were very positive about everything. You know, a lot of musicians, they talk about the old days. You know, I get that because, you know, I started playing as a professional musician in 1972, and I get musicians I worked with back in those days, and they say, "Oh, yeah, it's not the same like it was." I think, yeah, thank goodness for that. You know, it wasn't all good.
Yeah.
There was plenty of work for musicians, that's true, but you had to play a lot of crap. You know, you had to go and play holiday camps and play the, you know, whatever the song was at the time, tie yellow ribbon around the old oak tree or something. You know, you had to do that, and then hopefully, you know, in the week you go and do some jazz gigs. So it was all very different. What it does do is when I get young musicians asking my advice about their career, how they should go about it, I find it very difficult because I can no longer say to them, well, this is what I did, why don't you do that? Because a lot of these things, got to remember, the music world that I lived in, that I inhabited in those early days, well, and for much of my early career, probably the first 20 or even, first 20 years, that doesn't exist anymore. It's not there. So it's a whole new world. So I'm probably not the best person to ask a lot of these things, but I think that one thing that I'm very grateful for is that 10 years ago, through Jimmy Bruno, great jazz guitarist, he got me involved with Artist Works at Napa, California, who were not the very beginning of interactive online teaching, but we were there at at the early days. We're kind of pioneering that, and so I was dragged kicking and screaming into this world of computers and things. I could just about send and receive an email, and that was it. And then one day, all this equipment arrived at my house in a box. UPS turned up and all this stuff, and I opened it up, and there was a laptop, and then there was a camera and an interface, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I need a young person. So I contacted a friend of mine, Adam Bully, and I said, can you help me, please? And he used to come and help me with everything. And slowly but surely, I got used to how to work things. I'm still not great, but I record from here. I've got a Logic set up, and which works really well. And long as I'm not asked to do anything too complicated, I can do it. So I'm slightly ahead of it. So what happened really when lockdown came, and I was having this conversation yesterday because Ulf was saying that he wanted to. He said, I've just decided I need to get my own studio at home. I said, I've been telling you that for years. You need to do it. But he was on the road all the time with one project or another. And so I was just fortunate that I was like 10 years ahead of everyone. Well, not everyone, but not ahead of you. But I was 10 years ahead of a lot of my contemporaries. So as soon as this happened, I noticed that they're all these panic things are going on Facebook. Hey, learn online with me. Let's Skype lessons and all that. And hang on, you're not prepared for this. You're just. It's almost like a gigging musician's mentality of hey, I've got no gigs, I've got to get a gig. And I've been fortunate, and a lot of it's been through Artist Works, and mostly through my son James, who's an international keynote speaker, and he's a marketing guy and everything. He told me a long time ago. He's managed me since he was 19 years old, and and he said, you've got to diversify things. It's not all about going out on the road. And I said, well, that's fine, because I've been on the road since I was 16. So I'm quite happy to spend more time at home. So I diversified, and so and I have my online school. I have Patreon. I have music that I write, library music. I have my guitars. I have books that you and I are involved in. There's a whole bunch of things. There's about 5 or 6 different streams that I have that are all part of the big picture. I don't see it that I've gone into other areas. It's all part, because what happens, they actually all feed each other. The only thing is, when I go out on tour and I do gigs, it's not like in the old days. I say, oh yeah, I've got to make money to feed my family and pay the bills and everything. Now, when I go on the road, I get fees. I get fees for all the gigs, but I'm also thinking, this is great. I'm maybe there's some people here tonight that don't know about me, not seen me before, that might be interested in studying with me online or coming on my Patreon site. So I see it as it's almost like a missionary exercise of actually going out there and converting people and getting them to come onto my side. So it's all interconnected. Sure. And what I think is great when I talk to younger musicians, most of them, they get this totally. It's just my generation, a lot don't get it, and they're just starting to get it now because they've been forced to because of quarantine. And they've just suddenly go, oh, I can't go out, I can't go and play anybody, and I can't play in a band anymore. So what am I going to do? This is going to be, it's a bit of a panic.
Yeah. Well, I've always had immense amounts of respect for guys like yourself who are willing to adapt to the way the industry has changed. I think it's fascinating, and we're certainly going to talk about the way jazz education has changed over the years. I always think, to these old musicians that aren't willing to update and go into the way the 21st century works now. To me, it just reminds me of the days when we first discovered or invented music recording, and there were a lot of guys back then that were reluctant to record their music because the logic was,
Yeah.
oh well, I'm not going to record my music. Then there'd be no reason for people to come and see me play gigs. And it's just like, well, to be a bit jazz about things, like, do you want to be a moldy fig for your entire life? You've got to progress.
Actually, I can tell you a good story about that because, I toured with Stefan Grappelli for 11 years, made lots of records with him. So, of course, Stefan Grappelli and Django Reinhardt had the Hot Club of France. In a way, it was actually Stefan's band because Django wasn't an organized guy, and Stefan got it together. And the big kind of jazz impresario in Paris at that time was Charles Delaunay. Who then wrote a book about Django and Stefan. But Charles Delaunay came to Stefan and he said, I think you should make a record. They'd heard jazz records that came from America and everything. So Stefan said, yeah, that's a great idea. So Stefan went to Django and he said, okay, Charles Delaunay wants to record us, make a record. And Django says, it'll never catch on. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
He said, why not? He said that'll never catch on. People won't. They're not interested. People want to hear musicians play. They don't want to sit around. In those days it would have been a big kind of horn thing. Like his master's voice. And he said, nobody will want that. And he kept going on to him. Finally, they fixed a day to record it. And when they turned up, Django didn't turn up. And so they're all sitting around, and Charles Delaunay is getting very impatient. And of course, it went straight onto wax, straight onto disc. In those days, they sat around a microphone, and it just went straight onto that. So they were sitting there, and time was going by, and Charles Delaunay is getting annoyed. So Stefan finally says, "Okay, I'll go and see if I can find him." So it was in Pigalle. So Stefan went to every single billiard hall. In like a pool hall for people that aren't familiar with billiards, like snooker or pool, because he was a great billiard player, and he went to every smoky little dive of a billiard hall looking for him. Finally, he found him, and he said, "Look, come on, we're all waiting for you, and we're going to record it." And he said, "Look, I've told you, I don't want to do it, and it's not it's a waste of time, a complete waste of time. That's never going to catch on. Let's just go and play." So he managed to drag him along, and they sat down, and very reluctantly they started, and they recorded the first tune, and he wasn't really interested in it at all. His heart wasn't in it, but it was still great take. And of course, you could then, it went straight onto the vinyl. Well, it wasn't vinyl, it was, I think, whatever it was in those days. And when it finished, they said, okay, let's have a listen to it. And Django wasn't at all interested. And then they started it up, and for the first time ever, Django heard himself playing, and it was just like a magical spiritual experience for him. He went, "Oh man, oh, dis donc, c'est formidable, and let's do another one." And they did another recording, and he was completely hooked by it. And also, what happened then was because the reason the Hot Club of France didn't have drums or saxophones in them, because there was no microphones in those days. So they had to have a group where they could organically, acoustically, be dynamically on the same level. So that's why they didn't have drums. That's why they didn't have trumpets or saxophones.
Right.
It was an all-string group for that reason. But then what they found when they recorded was if they wanted to be a bit louder, Django would just move a little further to the microphone and come back. Stefan found it he could do the same. Stefan discovered a whole new technique of bowing, because he knew he didn't have to play in such a way to be heard, to be loud. So he could ease off on it, and he developed that beautiful bowing technique that he had. And when I worked with Stefan, he always sat very close to the microphone, and he played very soft. It was very quiet, and that was a secret to his sound. So that technology actually then changed the way they played. It brought another element to their playing, another depth and sensitivity to their playing. They didn't have to, keep hammering it out all of the time. So yeah, that's a good example of that, of being dragged, kicking, screaming, quite literally, from a billiard hall, and recording something and going, yeah, because it seems old-fashioned to us. Well, it is old-fashioned to us now, but it's no different from what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Of doing this virtually.
Sure. So talking about technology like that, I'll make a mention of the Artist Works stuff. You did mention it briefly, your online school with Artist Works. I wanted to make mention of this, and this won't last forever. This will only be relevant for a little while after this video goes up, but currently on Artist Works they have a sale on. You can use the code PATH100 to get $100 off an annual membership. So you're looking at $179 for a year of Martin's online school, which is an incredible deal. What I wanted to talk about though is you're adapting to technology, if you like, and your Patreon page more specifically. What is it that people can get by joining up to your Patreon page?
Well, with Patreon, there's a tiered system. There's $3 plus, $5 plus, $10 plus a month. And if anybody wants to give more, they're very welcome to. Some people do. Some people really go a bit further because they just feel they want to support me. They want to support the music. But whatever tier you decide to join at is great. I really, really appreciate it. So the $3 plus, they get all the studio sessions that I film here. And the reason I can do that is because the costs aren't great for me to do that. I have a video editor that I pay, who lives in the Philippines, Mark. So I just send stuff to him and he does it. I don't do all the editing or anything. So a lot of things like that. I take requests. So if somebody wants me to play a particular tune or whatever, then I'll film that. That's all available there. I also do guitar conversations, which I must get you on one of those at some point. We'll do one of these where I get guitar players. We just sit down, we chat, and we talk about their musical journey, and they play. We play together. I ask them some questions. It's not really a teaching thing, but it's really getting into that mind, because I found that I learned a lot just being around guitar players, musicians that were very experienced, and just hearing them talk. It's like when I worked with Stefan, he never gave me advice. I never asked him for advice, really. So, but just being around him, I learned so much just from things that he taught me. So I do that. Tommy Emmanuel's been a guest. Don Peake, great Don Peake from the Wrecking Crew, played on the Michael Jackson stuff, on so many things. Probably music from your childhood, actually, Levi. You would have been what was that Hasselhoff with the car? What was that?
Jump in my car.
No, what was that?
Oh, Knight Rider.
Knight Rider, that was it. Yeah, he did all the incidental music for Knight Rider. I guess you're the generation that would have been really into that as a kid.
I think that's a bit before me. I'm only 32.
Oh, is it? Oh no, I thought it would have been Knight Rider was still been around.
I think it was popular in the mid to late 80s, and I was born in 88.
You're even younger than I thought. Okay, yeah. So Muriel Anderson, a whole bunch of guitar players. So that's really good. That's for $5 plus. And then for $10 plus, I do lots of different things. Like I've just started up another kind of Zoom. I call it happy hour. I used to do it before, but we had a bit of problems with technology at that time when we first started. But now things have improved, so we're starting to do that. And just kind of random gifts and things. And it's it's a community, so it's very much a part of. Oh, and I do live. Yeah. I have videos of live shows as well that I put out. That's another thing. So it's not, as I said, it's not a teaching site.
Sure.
It's really a creativity site, and whatever I do, like I've been working with a wonderful keyboard player, Steve Hamilton, who plays keyboards with Billy Cobham's band, and so we've been doing all this kind of atmospheric music with all kind of synthesized and sampled sounds and everything. It's a great thing because we've done it here before, but now he can do it in his studio in Edinburgh, and I do my part here.
Yeah.
I've actually been playing nylon string guitar, which is a departure for me. But
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. Yeah, just coming up with ideas. And quarantine, this is a time when we kind of rethink things. And as musicians, as guitar players, we're creative people. It's just a natural thing that whatever happens, we just start creating stuff.
Yeah.
It's how our minds work. And when you have that bit of space, that bit of time where you're not running around all the time and you're at home, it gives you that time to think, not to dwell on negative things, but to just think about the positive outcomes, transforming negative into a positive thing, and thinking about things that we can do. So I've been just sort of thinking of new projects, not lots of things, but just different directions of creating music.
Yeah, and it's amazing because using something like Patreon, you're able to stay in touch with people more effectively. Like, obviously, I have a Patreon,
Yeah.
and this entire series of videos is brought to everyone by my Patreon support. So, massive thank you to my Patreon supporters. But I love Patreon as an idea just in general, because if you think back to Bach's days, that's how the man stayed in business, right? He had patrons. We're cutting out the middleman. Like, growing up, I spent a fortune on CDs, a fortune on records, and how much money went to the middleman there? And sure, okay, Patreon itself is a bit of a middleman, but they're taking nowhere near as much money as a record label is taking from an artist. So I think it's great to go out there and support some of your favorite artists if they have avenues to do that, and it gets you a little bit more kind of behind the scenes access to them, where you feel a little bit more. You get to see behind the wizard's curtain, if you like, and it's great.
Yeah.
It's great. I both for myself engaging with my own patrons, but also I'm on Charlie Hunter's Patreon. I joined up to your Patreon today because I want to go through all of the videos on there. And
I must join yours.
It's like there's just yours especially, to be completely honest with you. I've known that you've had a Patreon for a long time, and we'll talk about education in a second. But like I just don't have the time nowadays to really study and get value out of stuff in the way that I'd want to. But I joined up to yours today and immediately went, oh, wow, and was just overwhelmed by this wave of hundreds of things that I could then suddenly start going through and looking through. And I just think that's just a great resource.
What I did was I didn't really push it very much at the beginning because I wanted to get as much content as possible on there first. And when I first had it, I was putting content on 2 or 3 times a week because I just wanted to get more and more on there. And I wanted to, a lot of people at the beginning, they came on just say, I wonder what, let's go and check this out. And they didn't stay. But, now that the people that I've got, and I've got more people coming in, they tend to be people that stay. The retention has changed. But I remember when my son, James, who manages me, he told me about this. He said, there's this new thing. He said, it'd be really great, Patreon, where you get patrons. And he explained it to me. And I said exactly what you said. I said, that's how it used to be. That's how Bach and Beethoven, Mozart, they had patrons. But in those days, it was either the church or the royalty or aristocracy. They had patrons that people that wanted to be involved in the arts. Obviously, the church was the big one. Kings and queens, aristocracy would do that and commission them for various things. And it's the same thing in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful, it's a wonderful idea, and it's not a new idea. It's really it's hundreds of years old. Except they didn't have the technology. Which actually brings me to another thing, because I spend so much time on the road, and I was starting to think. I was on tour in America, and I was sitting at another airport, and I was sitting there, and a question came into my head: look, why do we musicians do this? And I thought, well, because I was having this schizophrenic conversation with myself. It's like the schizophrenic version of a chat show host. I was going, why do you actually do this? Well, I do it because the novelty of traveling wore off a long time ago. But I do it because I want to play for people. I want to share the music. I want to play with people. That's why I do it. I don't do it for this, sitting in an airport. And why have musicians been doing this for years? And I went back to the times of those musicians going back to the time of Paganini, when Paganini would do the big European tour, and they'd be gone for a year or something, at a time, or maybe even more, to do a tour around Europe. Why did they do that? And why do I do it? It's because I need to get to the people. So I have to travel, like all musicians, to go where the people are. Now, a few years ago, there was a thing started in Branson, Missouri, and I think the number of musicians started. I'm not sure if Glenn Campbell and Andy Williams, the guys that have been touring a lot and were well known, they all built theaters on the sides of their houses. And so it became a destination for normally people of a certain age group, an older age group, that would go along and see their fans. And they would go actually to where they lived, to their theater, and they're big setups. So this was before we could do all of this. So now people can actually, people that want to hear you or me play can actually come and see us play from our homes, from our studios. And it's one thing that I think quarantine has done for some people that were hesitant about that are now using this. They're now using Zoom to be in touch with their families, and they realize it's not some terrible, evil new invention or something to be afraid of. And it's actually really good that you can connect, this thing of, oh no, you've got to have the live concert. There's nothing like a live concert. Yeah, live concert is amazing, can be amazing. It can also be horrible. If you go to a horrible, smelly venue, and you can't see or something, now I think people aren't afraid of this. So this is actually opening up a lot of opportunities for us musicians, because those people that were doubting this whole concept, they're now used to using this this system, Zoom or Skype or whatever, to talk to their families. And I do it with my own family as well. And now a lot of them are saying, when this all finishes, why don't we do this anyway?
Yeah.
Why don't we still have a Wednesday night dinner together and quiz night? We do a quiz on a Wednesday night with my nieces and grandnieces and everything. And let's do this again. They realize actually it's not a dry experience. It's not. You really can connect in this way once you start doing it. And in other, in businesses and everything, I have my sister-in-law works in an office for the local council, and they gave her a laptop, and she's working from home now. And they're all going, but we can do this from home. Why do we have to go to this office block and sit there when we can do this all at home? And so that is another thing that's going to happen. You see office blocks, they're all going to turn into something else, because if you can work from home, so much the better, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless you want to get out of the house. You want to escape.
Yeah. Well, you can do that at the weekends. Okay, so let's move on to the important questions. I want to talk about practice with you. I would like to get your inputs on the idea of practice and how your practice has changed over the years. Because I did that Steve Vai 10-hour workout stream on YouTube. 10 hours sat in this chair.
Wow.
Didn't even go
That's
and pee for 10 hours. Yeah. And it really got me thinking about practice routines and how my practice has changed over the years. What does practice look like for you nowadays, and how has it changed from your youth?
I don't think it's changed very much. See, I started playing the guitar when I was very young. I was 4 or 5. I played a ukulele first one, and then from that, I think I got my first guitar when I was 4, a little guitar. But it was just something I kind of played with. It was just another toy, and I never had lessons in my life. But I was always around people that played. My dad was a jazz musician. So I learned a few chords, and I just played. I never, ever practiced. But I was playing the guitar was something I enjoyed tremendously. It just gave me it wasn't like I can't say I had a bad childhood, but I I didn't particularly enjoy my childhood. I was just looking forward to becoming a grown-up. That's what I wanted to do. Let's get this over and done with and just be a grown-up and go out and join a band. You know, that's what I really wanted to do. Let's get this all over and done with. So I used to go to school and look out the window, but all day my mind would be thinking about what I was going to play on the guitar. And tunes would go into my head, little melodies. Some of them were familiar melodies. Some of them were ones I was just making up. And as I would sit there, I would kind of visualize playing those on the guitar. And I would always do this. That's why I got terrible grades at school, because, he's a dreamer and all this kind of thing, which I was, because I was sitting there going, oh, yeah, a melody. And then I would think, how do I play that on the guitar? Oh, C. No, C. E would work better than C, and I'd work it out, and I could visualize myself playing it. And I would do that over the course of the day. When I got home, I would pick the guitar up and I would play it. And my mom would say, oh, I haven't heard you play that. What is that? So I've never played it before. Oh, that's incredible. But I mean, I had.
Hey.
I'd played it 1,000 times in my head during the course of the day. So that was a practicing skill that I developed very, very early on, of practicing without the guitar. And it came into very, very good use actually later on, when I really got into being a touring musician from 1979 to the present day, to present time, until lockdown.
A few months ago, yeah.
And because, if I was driving the car, or if I was on the plane, or I was in the airport sitting in the waiting room, in the lounge, I'd start thinking about what I was going to play that night. And I would say, okay, oh, that would be good. Yeah. Okay. And I'd do exactly the same thing that I used to do as a kid. Then when I got to the gig, maybe I'd sit in the dressing room, I'd pick the guitar up, and I'd start feeling up. I wouldn't necessarily play it that night. Maybe I'd start, it needs a little bit more work on, but then I'd start thinking about it for a while. But the amount of practicing that I actually did on the guitar was minimal, because all the practicing I did was actually in my head. And because I'd been playing from such a young age, I grew up with playing the guitar. The guitar just became like a second limb to me. So I was very fortunate. I wasn't one of those guitar players that had to pick up the guitar every day. And I'm still like that now. And so I'm really glad I didn't take up a trumpet or an instrument where you had to keep the muscles going, everything, the embouchure going. The guitar isn't really like that. The only thing is, if you don't play for a while, fingers get a bit sore. So my actual practicing of sitting down and playing is minimal. But whenever I heard something, I just absorbed it. It went into the back of my mind. If I heard a band playing, and it wouldn't necessarily be a guitar player, I think, oh yeah, I like that if I could play something like that on the guitar. And then I would just think about it before I played it. And when I write music, I do that as well. I never write music with a guitar, because if you do that, or certainly if I do that, I just play guitar things on the guitars. So that's why I developed a way of playing that my solo playing. If I'd have worked that out with the guitar all the time, I probably never would have done it, because I worked it out what I wanted to hear. And I kind of worked out in my mind how I would actually physically do that before I could actually physically do it. And then when I actually sat down and played, then it started to come together, because I had it in my mind actually how to do this. I just then had to learn. And one of the things that happened for me was when I started to play solo guitar and concentrate on solo playing, after playing exclusively in bands, I had all these ideas. I had these fantastic ideas. I would listen to jazz piano players, Bill Evans and things, and say, oh yeah, I'd love to play that. And I'd kind of figure that out in my mind. But then when I picked up the guitar, I realized I wasn't a good enough guitar player. There's basically two things. There's the art and the craft. And that's what we're doing, the art and the craft. So you can have somebody have the craft, be able to really shred, but they don't have anything to say because they haven't developed the art side. Then you'll have somebody who knows what they want to do, but is so frustrated. I've got so many students like this. I know what I want to play, but I can't do it because every time I pick up the guitar, I play the same thing. muscle memory just kicks in, and I play the same stuff all the time. So I then had to get my playing up to scratch, because I'll say something might be controversial here. I don't care.
I like controversy.
No, but it's true. It's something I know, and I was one of these people. So many jazz guitar players, many jazz guitar players. I would say the majority of them, although it's changing a little bit now, as a lot of jazz guitar players are getting more into solo playing. But a lot of jazz guitar players were all fantastic jazz musicians, but they weren't very good guitar players. They didn't have a great command of the guitar because they didn't need to. They just played because they were imitating horn players' lines, so they were playing mostly single line playing. So they were really good at that. But a lot of the technicalities of actually playing the guitar, things that you do, things that classical players do, folk guitar players do, they're techniques that jazz guitar players didn't need to incorporate. They didn't need to learn them. It wasn't because of they didn't have the ability to do it, but they didn't need to do that.
Sure.
So I was one of those. I was one of those jazz guitar players that was a good jazz musician. So I understood the music. I could improvise, but I wasn't a particularly good guitar player. And so I had to up my game as a guitar player. And what I did was I lived in, at that time, which would have been in the late 70s, I guess, late 70s, 80s. I lived in a very remote part of Scotland. I still live in Scotland, but I'm not so remote now. And I had no one to play with. I would go off and I would tour with Stefan and a few other people, and then I'd come back and I'd just be at home. We didn't have any technology in those days, any of this stuff. We didn't even have, I think, fax machines just arrived or something by that time. So I just used to be at home playing on my own. So I could only play myself. So I developed playing solo. And I think what's going to happen with this quarantine is actually a lot of guitar players that have never played solo before are going to start playing, are going to get more into playing solo style. And not necessarily become solo players, because I'm not exclusively a solo player myself. I play in all kinds of setups, but that's something that I do mostly.
Sure.
Yeah. So then what I did with practicing as well is that I only really practiced / rehearsed my repertoire. So I never ever saw the point in playing anything, practicing something that I was never going to play. I just seemed like a terrible waste of time to me. I never practiced exercises because I realized actually I could incorporate those into playing anyway. A lot of those things are in the music anyway. So rather than sit down and go out of my mind playing scales, I tried it a few times because I felt that's what I needed to do. I thought, well, actually, all of that is already in the music.
Yeah.
So I just played the music. So that was my approach. It's not that is for everybody, but it's what worked for me. Some people want to have more of a kind of set out formula for doing things and want a set way of practicing. But one thing about practicing you have to be very careful of, especially us guitar players, because we're terrible noodlers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We would just noodle. And someone said, "Oh yeah, I practiced for 2 hours yesterday." No, you didn't. You just noodled. There was no construction to it. What did you do? You just played the same things over again because they feel good and sound good. Because that's one of the things. It feels good, doesn't it? When you get to play something, it feels great to play a guitar. It's a beautiful tactile experience. And there comes a time you have to say, okay, I do need a bit of a formula for this. And for me, that framework for practicing was actually just the repertoire of learning songs, because I wanted, I got married when I was 19. I was a dad at 20, and so all my adult life I've been a provider.
Yeah.
So I had to get gigs. I had to earn money. So to do that, I had to learn lots of tunes. And nobody was going to give me gigs if I couldn't play tunes. Reading wasn't my strong point. I wasn't a very good reader at all, but I had a fantastic ear. I learned everything by ear. So I got gigs because, oh yeah, that's that guitar player that knows every song, every tune, knows every single standard under the sun. And if he doesn't know it the first time round, second time he's got it because he's got a great ear. So I got lots of work, and I did that, for practical reasons. It also meant that I never developed the skill of being a sight reader. I can read music, but I never became a sight reader. So yeah, my practice was very different. It was kind of suited to me, so it wouldn't be for everybody. But I think that's the biggest danger about practicing, so-called practicing. Is it practicing? Is it just noodling?
Yeah, no, I know that very well. The thing I say to my students all the time is we don't practice scales because if we practice scales, we play scales. Anything you practice, if you can practice a scale up and down for 10 hours, and at the end of that you'll be able to play that scale really, really well, but then to play a profound melody out of that scale, the one doesn't naturally lead to the other.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot more experience of application of the scale that I think you get from learning actual real life music.
And when you get into interpretation and actually making music, a scale is a kind of a dry thing. And then so I'd find myself then interpreting the scale, playing it in a certain way, putting a certain feel into it. And then you get into a melody, and then you think, well, why play that? But obviously we have to get a dexterity together.
Sure.
It's like sometimes you play something and there's one part that is tricky, keeps tripping you up. The thing to do there is just keep playing it over and over and over and over again, over and over and over again. Because we have this built-in mechanism, I guess it's a brain thing. We have muscle memory, and muscle memory does kick in. You remember when you first started to play and you just played a C chord, and you go, right, that finger, that one there, that one there, and you do it, and then you're blocking chords, you're blocking strings off, and you get it. And then you take your hand away. Right, now play that C chord again. All right, now let me see. That one there, that one there. After a while, your hand just goes into it. Muscle memory.
Sure.
It's nature. So if you just keep going over and over again, don't worry about it. I have students that will say to me, I'm really worried about this because I just can't get this. I say, just play it over and over again. Don't worry. Muscle memory will do it.
Yep.
Nature will take over. It's how you're built. It's how we're designed. It will do it. If you do it again, the only way to become a good instrumentalist, I'm kind of differentiating between being a musician and being an instrumentalist, whether it's the guitar, any instrument, is you have to have that ability to do things over and over and over again. I think my brother he's not a musician, but he didn't play anything, but he could have been a better musician than me. But he didn't have that ability to go play something over and over and over and over again. I think probably, because I was probably a bit on the spectrum, and I think a lot of musicians are like that. We have that repetitive thing that we can do that. I think it was Einstein who said the definition of madness is when you keep doing something over and over and over again, thinking it will change. The definition of madness. So insanity. So we are all officially insane guitar players because we can do that. I love playing it over and over again because I really thought, eventually this is going to change. And when I get it, I'm going to discover something else about it as well. Whereas my brother would play it once, twice, 3 times. Forget it. That was it. So I think anybody that becomes a guitar player at whatever level, even to the point of just getting beyond playing the little, the campfire chords, Tommy Emmanuel calls them, playing the campfire chords and just discovering other things and getting into it to that point where you want to discover things. You've got that kind of mind that likes repetitive, is happy to do that, actually gets pleasure from that repetitive thing, whereas some people, it's a torture to them. It's like, the water torture on the head, but to us it's wow.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still do it all these years later.
And I think, I mean, you've probably also given a good insight there as to what your thoughts are on the way jazz education is in institutions nowadays, with the emphasis always being on practicing the scales and modes over things like vocabulary and harmony and things like that. Any additional thoughts on? You want to shout at the music schools? What's your message to music schools?
Well, music schools. No, I think it's a wonderful thing. We didn't have any when I was playing, when I started out. Well, we had music schools, but you had to play classical music, and I didn't want to play classical guitar. I was steeped in jazz. I grew up in a house of jazz. The first music I heard was Django Reinhardt, Louis Armstrong, Fats Waller, all these old, the old school jazz musicians that really got me in good stead. I sort of understood the kind of the history, where the music came from. So I was absolutely steeped in it, and my dad being a jazz musician. So it was a language that I grew up with. It was like my mother tongue, as it were. So I can understand when schools started up teaching jazz, it had to be done in a certain way for certain people, learning the language, learning it. And so it's taught in a kind of academic way, thinking of it like a language. I know when I went to school, wasn't for very long. I left when I was 15, but the last 2 years I was at school, we were learning French, and it was academic, up on the board. Je mange, tu manges, il mange, je mangeais, nous mangeons. All this thing. It was up on the board, and we learn it, and then we put it in our books. Then when I went to France, when I started working with Stefan, and then later on, when I actually lived in France for 6 years, those 2 years of learning French as an academic subject, I realized wasn't completely useless, because there are some things that were familiar, but I couldn't speak French. I couldn't speak French to save my life. So you could study jazz improvisation as an academic subject, have an understanding of it, but if you actually sat down in a jam and they said, okay, all the things you are play, you might not be able to play it. There's chances you'd struggle doing it, because you're too busy with this. What you have to do is, how you learn a language is you copy, you listen and you copy. And that's how we do it from as babies, as we start hearing people talk mama, dada, all these, we learn all those words, and then we start stringing sentences together. And that's how you need to learn jazz, because that's how you learn a language, and it is a language. So that's why the latest book that we did, I called it a phrase book, because I was actually on a flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo a few years ago, and I go to Japan a lot, and I can't speak Japanese, but I have a few words. And I was on the plane, and I got my Japanese phrase book out just to get the sound again, some ideas of some of the phrases. And it dawned on me. I thought, this is how you should teach improvisation, as a phrase book. Just learn some easy phrases first. Learn the equivalent of where is the train station?
Sure.
Do you have a room for one night? Is how much for a beer? 2 beers, please.
Yeah,
Another beer, please.
I can see where you focused your language practice.
More beer, please. Can I have some peanuts with that beer, please? You learn all these sentences that are useful, so you can actually communicate with people. So if you learn some phrases, jazz phrases, and you sit down with some musicians and you play a jazz blues in B flat, you've got some phrases harmonically and melodically that you can play. You've got some phrases. I mean, there's lots of books on licks. Of course, it is very similar to licks. It is licks. That is part of it, but it's a little bit more than that, where you can see where you can actually take those licks, take those phrases, and then use those as a springboard.
Sure.
So when you learn to say you learn. I noticed something I noticed from I work a lot in America, and something I noticed, the difference between American English and English is that there are more nuances in our English because we have many ways of saying things, and leaving a space, leaving a gap, not saying something speaks volumes as well. Whereas I've noticed, I've had this conversation with many American friends of mine as well, is that Americans tend to speak more in phrases and set phrases. How you doing? Have a nice day. You know, there's all these that they don't. Whereas you and I talking, there are more kind of nuances of how we would say things. And I think the reason for that is we come from a very old country where language has developed from many languages and many influences that have come in over hundreds, thousands of years. Whereas America is a country of immigrants. So people came there where it was decided English was going to be the main language. So people had to learn how to speak English. So they learned in phrases. So that's why American English is more phrase-based than ours. You know, we have a lot of nuances. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you and I could, as when we started today, say hello to each other. You know, if we were American, we'd say, "Hey, Levi, how you doing?" You know, because that's a phrase.
Sure.
But with us, we as British people from this crazy little septic isle that we come from, we have other funny little things, and you have regional ones as well. That,
and you have to ask about the weather as well. You can't say hello without asking.
Well,
how the weather
I mean, you've got to spend the first hour and a half talking about the weather.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways. There's so many different words for rain, especially here where we live in Scotland. There's dreich. There's
yeah, the rain never stops. We had a bit of sun this week, maybe four lovely days of sun, and now we're back to rain. And our summer has been and gone.
It was magnificent. We had a wonderful week of summer.
So I mean, I'm totally on board with all of that. I think for anyone that's listening back to this conversation, if you just take a step back and think about what has happened here, we've listened. We've actually conversed, and as part of that, we certainly didn't script what we were saying to each other. There was no plan in advance. We are very much improvising right now as we have this conversation, but we still have the idea of what we want to convey. Now, I've not invented any words when I've been speaking to you. I am using phrases that I have expressed before, but I'm using them to express my ideas fluently and on the fly. And when I look through, when I've been working through some of the new book, which for anyone interested is called Jazz Guitar Licks Phrase Book, picture of it on screen now, you do see a lot of vocabulary in there as part of these longer licks that you see time and time again. Like over a G major 7 chord, you'll ascend up a B minor 7 arpeggio. That's the theory side of things, and that's not important. What is important is when you learn 50 phrases and you see that small fragment appearing in the middle of a line multiple times, to me, that's the part that you really latch onto. You go, okay, it's interesting how that part of the phrase has been used here and here and here, and it is seamlessly melded together with all of the other vocabulary to create something that is authentic. Because, as I said earlier, you can learn all the scales in the world, you can learn all the arpeggios in the world, but what you end up with is me playing jazz. When I go out and play jazz, it very much sounds like someone thinking their way through the gig, because there isn't as much experience in the real fluent aspect of it, the real conversational nature of jazz. And I think putting more time into phrases and learning, I hate saying licks because I know that puts off a lot of people, it puts off a lot of students, but really putting time into learning phrases and understanding the language, that has been the thing that has significantly improved my playing over the last 5 or 10 years. It's understanding how people play and what they play and how they use vocabulary over and over again. It can be terrifying, I think, to paint this idea that improvisation is this thing that comes from another place, and you stand up on stage and close your eyes and then just magic things happen that have never happened before. And sure, you want some of that. It's great when you play something on the guitar that you play and you've never played before, and you smile when you do it and you go, that was fun. Let's explore that idea a little bit more. But it's certainly, well, for me at least, I wouldn't say that, it's not 100% of my playing. It's not even 50% of my playing. Those are the magic moments. If I can have one moment like that a week, that would be awesome. But yeah, so phrases, learn phrases, learn phrases, learn to speak.
I have a mantra, music first, theory later. And you can find out later what you actually playing. I really played purely by ear first of all, but as I was going along, just slightly behind what I was doing by ear, I was getting an understanding of the theory. Even though I didn't know the words to them, I knew I was starting to get a theory idea of what I was doing, even though I wasn't trained or educated in music theory. When you think music, humans have been making music since the beginning of times, the beginning of human existence. We make music, and it's what we do. It's very important. Every single culture makes music, and none of them have been held back by theory. They just made music, and then musicologists will come along and then actually say what they're doing. But the way I learned to improvise, I was very fortunate. Just this little seed that was planted in my mind by my dad. He played me this record, of Django Reinhardt, and just something about Django's playing really spoke to me. That was that directness, because I realized later that he was a storyteller on the guitar, and that's how I see myself when I play. It's a form of storytelling. So I would listen to Django playing, and I remember my dad saying to me once, he said, it was something like, one of those tunes they played, Sweet Georgia Brown or something. When it came the second time around, Django went into all this other stuff. The melody wasn't there anymore. And my dad said, my dad said, you see, that's incredible. What he's doing there, he's improvising. So I was probably only about 7 years old at the time, probably. And I said, what's improvising? Because I was already playing the guitar and I could play some of those tunes, the melodies.
Yeah.
He said, well, what he's doing there, he said, they're playing the same chords, but he's making up another melody as he goes along. And I went, oh, it clicked immediately. It was so simple. It was such a simple answer for a little, for a kid playing the guitar to understand, because he couldn't go into, well, he's playing a diatonic thing and he just says, well, he's making up his own melody. And I've always kept that simplistic approach. So what you can do, the way jazz is taught is taught really. If you say, well, you've got three elements, you've got the melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic elements of music. Obviously, in instrumental music, of course, with singing, you've got the lyrics, storytelling. But okay, we've only got three to work with. So the way it's taught most of the time, is harmonically. Okay, so these are the chords, these are the scales on that chord, these are the modes on that chord. So you can play this scale on that chord, and then that's this scale on that chord, and you can join these two chords up, these two scales up with this, so that's and there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's absolutely legitimate, because I do that some of the time. But you're using the harmony as the framework, but you can also use the melody as a framework as well. You don't have to just work around the chord sequence. So if I play, let's think, tunes. Can you hear my guitar okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
If I played something like Fly Me to the Moon, it's a jazz. Well, actually, like all jazz standards, it didn't start as a jazz tune, but it's a tune that jazz musicians like to play. So we got this melody. I'll accompany myself on this. Now, if I look at the chords, A minor 7, G7, C. So I can have those chords, but I can also have the melody. And I can use that as a framework as well. I'm doing there is I'm actually targeting notes. So you can target the third of a note. Actually, the melody is on the third, minor third. Actually, the melody is on the third.
Yeah.
So I can play. Now that's a phrase targeting the third of each note. You can do the fifth, you can do whatever. So I'm just playing around the melody, and then I can, from that, if you play the melody first, play with the melody, use target notes, chromatics, you start taking out, and you start taking it further out, and further out, and it will always have a flow to it, and it will always sound authentic. It won't sound like this if you just play over the chords. Now I'm just playing the scales of each chord there, and it just sounds like okay. Whereas if I still incorporate, so I'm still using the harmonic sequence because I'm staying within that, but I'm also using little bits of the melody as well, and those target notes. And then the third element, which is never taught, and I don't know why, is rhythmic. So you can just find rhythmic phrases. Okay, that's just a little rhythmic phrase, and I'm making it sounds very monotonous because it's supposed to be, because I'm just describing it. So if you have that, okay, I can use that as a rhythmic phrase. So really what I'm doing when I'm improvising, I'm using all three of those. I'm using all three frameworks, but I'm not saying, all right, now I'm going to use the harmonic framework, now I'm going to use the rhythmic. It's just they are that's actually what's involved when I'm playing. So when a solo doesn't sound authentic, it's usually because the only framework that is being used are scales or modes over scale over the harmony.
So I'm going to go into mega sarcasm mode here. So hang on, you're telling me that when you played there, you didn't think to yourself, well, I better play some Superlocrian over the 5 chord?
No, because I don't actually know what that is.
Yes.
I never studied modes, so I don't know. And at one point I thought I should learn this really, and I had to look at the different names, and I just couldn't. By that time I was getting too old to be able to retain the information. But I realized when I played them, I said, yeah, I know what that is. I just never put a name to it.
Yeah.
And I was like that with a lot of the time when I played things, I knew what the chords were, but I didn't necessarily, if I played something and the guitar player would say, what is that chord you're playing? Then I would have to say, oh, well, it's okay, well, it's an A flat, and I've got the major 7 there, but I've got the 9 here, and so I would have to think of it after, but I know the sound that I want. It's like a painter or a chef. When a painter will learn how to mix colors, and they will know, and you could analyze it and say, well, it's this much sienna, it's this much of that color, this much of that is the recipe for making that color. But then, and an artist will know that, but then with experience, they will just mix that color without thinking about it.
Yeah.
A chef will know what the recipe is, how to do something. They will change the recipe slightly, and they will know from instinct, not just from instinct, but the instinct that has come from experience and study and knowledge, but it becomes instinctive. They'll know that soup that needs such and such in it.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing. I use painting and cooking as very good similes for these things. Sometimes people can get it a little bit more when you say, okay, you're making soup. Improvising. What am I doing? Okay, I'm making soup. What does it need?
Yeah.
Where you've got to have the ingredients. How you're going to put them in at the right time. Okay, don't put that ingredient in at the beginning. Leave it till later, because otherwise it will lose its flavor. In the same way, don't put that great lick in right at the very beginning of your solo. Save it for later and surprise everyone and knock their socks off when you suddenly go, no, I didn't expect that. You know?
And of course, if you've spent your entire life only playing Eric Clapton style blues guitar licks, and that's the only ingredient you have, let's call it ketchup. Don't put ketchup in the soup. You might need to go out and learn what a few more ingredients taste like.
Yeah, actually, funny you should say that, because it's something I hear sometimes with my students, and I tell them about it when they do it, where they've come from a more of a rock and blues background, and they've been Clapton fans, as I'm a Clapton fan, but what happens is that's their early vocabulary, and they're learning a new vocabulary, and they're improvising, and I hear them playing, and I can actually look at I can see the cogs going in their head, and I can see they're running out of ideas, and then they fall into default mode, and for them their default mode is going back into the Eric Clapton licks that they have, and then suddenly it's like an actor suddenly going out of character.
Yeah.
You've always got to stay, whatever you're playing, always stay in character. If I was to play, and I play blues, I love playing blues. If I was playing an electric guitar and playing a blues solo, single string, then I wouldn't suddenly go into a bebop thing, because I'd be going out of character. It wouldn't be serving any purpose to the music, which is really what we're there for. We're there to serve the music. All it's doing is saying to a couple of guitar players in the audience, hey, look, I know some jazz licks. It doesn't actually add anything. It actually takes away from it. So it's for me, I've only ever really played jazz, and I think jazz and blues, I see them as the same thing anyway. They're so closely related. Jazz really comes out of blues. That my vocabulary, my musical vocabulary is jazz. So if I go to my default mode when I'm playing jazz, my default mode is jazz.
Yeah.
That's why I have to be careful when I play blues, and I'm playing authentically and paying respect to that music, and I sort of run out of ideas. I have to say to myself, don't play a major 7. Don't play a flat 5.
Yeah.
Don't play a flat 9.
Yeah. Yeah, don't put all the spice in there. Well, I'm going to wrap things up now, because I've taken up way too much of your time. But though it did get me thinking when you said that. Obviously, you've got a lovely collection of guitars, and you've got the Fibonacci in front of us as we speak. But I'll have you plug that in a second. But I was wondering, do you own any solid body electric guitars?
Yeah, I've got one here. I've got a Godin there, which is actually a synth guitar. Up until recently, I had a Vietnamese-made Telecaster, which was a really good guitar. But I actually gave it to a neighbor's son, because he kept coming in here playing it, and he loved it. And one day I just said, "Oh, go on, have it." So he said, "But I'd like to get another one." I used to have a Telecaster when I lived in London in the 70s, and I was doing a mixture of work. I always had a Telecaster, and it was from the 60s. I also have 2 PRS guitars as well, which I don't have them here. They're in America. That Paul gave me, and one is I think you've got some similar PRS guitars like that, and the other one is it's more of a jazz guitar, but it's not really a full-on archtop guitar, but it's got more of a jazz kind of thing about it. I've had the reason I play archtop guitars isn't because it's a jazz guitar player thing to play them. It's because it was very important for me to develop my own sound. And even though I play archtop guitars, I don't play with a real full-on standard jazz guitar sound. I don't have that middly, plummy, dark sound. There's more sparkle to my sound, more sustain. I use round wound strings. I don't use flat wound strings. So I don't play with that kind of sound. It's more sparkly. I get grief sometimes from the real purist jazz guitar, electric jazz guitar players, because I don't get a sound like kind of Wes Montgomery, Jim Hall type sound. And there's been times when I have actually played a guitar and I borrowed a guitar because for one reason or another. I remember once actually playing in Australia and I had a problem with my guitar, and a friend of mine lent me a 175. Well, I used to have a 175 many years ago, and it had flat wound strings on it. It was really set up as a jazz guitar for that kind of sound. And I played it and I couldn't get any kind of sparkle out of it or bottom end. It was all middle, and I played it. And all the real dyed-in-the-wool jazz guitar players came out and says, "Great sound, man. Why don't you play with that sound more often? Why don't you play with that sound rather than your semi-acoustic sound?" I said, "Well, it's not me. It's." Yeah. So I worked really hard over the years for my sound, and pretty much if I play any kind of, even though I played that guitar and it still had that kind of sound, you could still hear that it was me.
Yeah.
But it's what it did. It sounded like me playing a 175 with flat wound strings on. If I play a Fender Telecaster, it still sounds like me, but it sounds like me playing a Telecaster. If I play a Gibson L5, a real jazz guitar, it sounds like me playing an L5. So I actually have moved towards guitars that just have a really good sound, really good sounding guitars, but don't have too much personality of their own. Some guitars have such a personality that you can listen to it and say, "Oh, playing such and such a guitar there." Whereas I can play any of these guitars and you probably wouldn't know which one it was.
You'll get your sound.
Yeah, so I can get my sound out of all these guitars, any style of guitar like this, because with probably one or two exceptions, they don't have strong enough personalities, which is not necessarily what you want with a guitar.
Yeah.
You want to be able to express yourself so that it sounds like you. It's like playing through an amp. If I played a Telecaster through a Fender Twin, it would sound like me playing a Telecaster through a Fender Twin. So, but I don't want that. I just want the music to be the most important thing.
Sure. Yeah, fine. So check out Fibonacci guitars, because Martin currently has a signature model with Fibonacci guitars, and they're stunning, absolutely stunning. Hold it up for us.
Yeah, this is actually the prototype. This is one of the. Let me put this one down. If you were to buy one of these Joya, I call them the Joya. I designed them with Fibonacci. Used a lot of their ideas, but brought some of my ideas in as well. And all my guitars, well, most of my newer guitars are all 15-inch low bout guitars, and slightly wider fingerboard as well, because more jazz guitar players these days are playing fingerstyle. When I started, there were very few of us, and also there are more fingerstyle guitar players wanting to play a jazz guitar. So for me, I go between pick and fingerstyle. So it's absolutely beautiful instrument, and you can check that out. You can go on my website and find that, martintaylor.com.
Cool.
We'll go on the Fibonacci website. But yeah, I think it's a really great thing. When there was a time when guitar companies, I used to work quite often with Barney Kessel, and there was a Barney Kessel Gibson guitar, and I asked him once, I said, why don't you play the Barney Kessel guitar? He said, "I never played it." He said they just had what a lot of companies used to do back in those days, 50s and 60s, and before then. They used to have models of guitars, and then they would say to a guitar player, "Can I put your name to this?" And that's what happened. They actually had no input in the design of the guitar.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great things, and we have such fantastic archtop guitar makers and flat top guitar makers, electric solid guitar makers now, so many that are approachable. You can talk to them and you can tell them what you want. So it's not a matter of that. There you go. There's your guitar.
Yeah.
And if you say, "Well, I'd like it a bit like that," they actually didn't want to hear you. They didn't want to hear what you had to say. the way it works best with a guitar is if guitar player can work with the guitar builder, and then we're both very eccentric type people, but in different kinds of ways.
Yeah.
But if you can find a sympathetic guitar builder, then that can be the way to go. And even a lot of the major companies now, they're really open to that kind of thing too.
Which is great. I mean, I'm a big advocate of various guitar brands, and I've got a custom guitar on order again at the moment, and I like that. I like being able to go to a company and say, "This is what I want. I want this specific thing, please."
Actually, how many guitars do you have now?
I
You
think
have a lot.
maybe 15. Not enough would probably be the right answer.
You don't have as many guitars as me. I think I've got about 20.
Yeah. You own, if memory serves me right, you own one of Val Doonigan's guitars, right?
Yes, I've got Val Doonigan's guitars right here.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you can see it. That was Val's. I used to watch Val Doonigan. Do you actually remember Val Doonigan? You're too young.
No, but my father-in-law is obsessed. So
is he? Okay. Yeah. Well, Val Doonigan was in the 60s. He was the most famous TV variety show host. He was a singer. He played guitar. He was great. Because he was such a fan. He was a big Django Reinhardt fan, and because he was such a fan of the music, he used to get great guests. He'd get Chet Atkins on there. I went on his show with Stefan Grappelli as well. And he knew the music. But when I was a kid, I felt I've got the record, the vinyl here. I was given a record for my birthday with a photo of Val with that very guitar on there, and I just had this cheap guitar that was horrible to play, and I was always going on to my parents, I wish I had a guitar like that. And he was famous for wearing these very bright colored sweaters, because it was the very beginning of color television. It just switched from black and white to color, so his wife got him to wear these very colored bright colored sweaters, so that was his trademark. So on this album cover, he was wearing that guitar, one of these colored sweaters. So when it's my birthday, my mum said to me, "Here's your birthday present. I know you've always been looking at that record cover," and I thought I was getting the guitar, and she knitted me a sweater. Anyway, I told Val the story. I got to know him. Became friends with him, and I told him the story, and he said, "I don't know whether to laugh or cry at that story." He said, "It's one of the funniest, but one of the saddest stories I've ever heard." And then a few weeks later, his daughters turned up at one of my gigs, and they said, "Dad couldn't come to the gig tonight because he's got the flu, but he's got this present for you." And they gave me the very guitar that I used to stare at when I was a kid. I don't know what guitar you looked at when you were a kid, but it's maybe looking at. It's like looking at Brian May's guitar, and then saying that story to Brian May. Then Brian May go there you go, Levi.
Yeah. If someone could pass on that message to Eddie Van Halen and get
Eddie
the
Van Halen
Frankenstrat sent over, that would be wonderful, please.
That's the guitar for you.
Yeah.
Well, I've got your equivalent of that guitar.
I think it would be the guitar for me. Anyway, as I said, I'm gonna wrap things up, because I said I'd have you on for half an hour, and we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. So apologies, but
that's what always happens. It's fine. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed having a chat, and best wishes to everybody there that are watching this.
Please do head on over to Martin's site. Check out his artist works, but most importantly, check out his Fundamental Changes books. I'll reel them off now. It's Beyond Chord Melody, Walking Bass for Jazz Guitar, Single Note Soloing for Jazz Guitar Licks Phrase Book, and I hear that there's another one in the works, but
there's another two.
Okay. I'm only aware of one of them, so okay.
Yeah, we think we've got a third one. We're just they're probably going to break that news to you gently, as you're going to have to transcribe it.
I like having stuff to do.
But Levi, it's really great chatting with you, because I'm a fan of yours, because you're a fantastic musician.
Thank you very much.
And I'm always singing your praises to everybody. I'm just so glad we get to work together with these books and doing something like this. And I look forward to, after quarantine, come to visit your studio.
Yeah.
And you come visit mine.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Cool. Thanks very much, Martin. And yeah, as always, please do hit that like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And yeah, check Martin out. Send him your love. Let him know I sent you. And yeah, see you for another video soon. Goodbye.